Good afternoon. If it's hump day, it's hemp day. Welcome to this week's episode. I'm Robert Colangelo. I'm going to be your moderator for today's session. Viobin is an oil extraction company, and they've been in business for quite some time. They're one of the largest in the Midwest. They're located in Michigan City, Indiana. They're only about 20 minutes from our indoor vertical farm. And I've had the pleasure to work with Nate over the last year. I found him to be reliable, trustworthy, knowledgeable, and what most impressed me was his humble nature. He really knows a lot about hemp and oil extraction, but is quite humble about that. He's the business development manager at Biobin, and he's going to talk about CBD oil extraction, and his presentation is going to include the who, what, where, when, and why of oil extraction. Who are the players? How do you extract CBD oil? What kind of solvents are used in the extraction process? And lastly, probably what we all want to know is what kind of contracts are extractors executing with farmers these days to process their biomass into oil? So with that, please welcome Nate Forristall. Nate, it's all yours.
All right. Well, happy Wednesday, everybody. Thanks for having me, Robert, Midwest Hemp Council, Marguerite, people I've met with in the past. The hemp has been a challenge for all of us, so seminars, webinars like this are very helpful. This is going to cover cannabis extraction, and as Robert said, please note I want to approach the subject with a lot of humility. We're learning a ton every day. If you find something within this presentation that you think is factually incorrect or inconsistent with your views, please get with me after. I absolutely make mistakes as well, and I'm always open to learning. So background on Biobin. So instead of cannabis extraction, take another step back, oil extraction company. You can extract a number of oils within the food space. The primary focus the last couple of decades has been wheat germ, other ag commodities with domestic and international customers. There's the oil side, and then there's the toasted granules side to it as well. It's actually a solid. The ownership is comprised of farmers and ranchers. Our sister company is Panhandle Milling. So that's really where we cut our teeth, is in flour milling, food production, ingredient supplier. We have multiple decades of operating in the commodity space as both a buyer and seller. I think this is important because commodities are cyclical, and a lot of people in this space will tell you that relationships do matter. We really view ourselves again as an ingredient supplier. By no means are we strictly just a cannabis company. We were excited about this market because as you go to natural food product shows, you look at the growth and those, and customers want to know where their food comes from. This entire farm to table movement has gained a ton of traction. What exactly does a CVD extractor do? So in a nutshell, the extractor is responsible for converting the biomass into a form that humans can consume. So the decarboxylation process, by using heat, pressure, time, you convert any of those acidic compounds to CBD, CBG, any other minors that can be readily available for human consumption. Keep in mind that if you see a COA and there's CBGA, CBDA, THCA, those will all convert at 0.877, so it's not a one-to-one conversion. An extractor, again, they're decarbing, winterizing, making sure that finished goods can be sent out so consumers can access these products and be ready for. It's all about bioavailability. So let's get into some of the technologies used for extraction. Solvents, the most common along with CO2. This includes ethanol, isopropyl, butane, hexane. People like these because they're efficient, right? CO2, higher cost of entry, more upfront capital. It uses pressures and temperatures to extract the oil. I have not been around a CO2 extraction facility, so by no means am I an expert. I know that they certainly have challenges that we do not have and vice versa. And then another technology being explored is steam distillation, aqueous extraction, as I've also heard it referred to. But yeah, think alcohol distillation, same sort of concept, right? Again, you know, just touching upon the three technologies, it seems like solvent at this point is probably the most mature. The other two are certainly gaining traction. So like I said, everything's about trade-offs, right? So we just try to look through this with a really, you know, clear lens and try to be honest about the pros and cons of these. So, you know, getting into CO2 here, it's very, very efficient. It's easier to really fine tune, no chlorophyll, but again, it's very expensive. Your throughput, building a scalable CO2 facility certainly presents its challenges financially. Steam distillation, definitely cheaper, no toxic residue, again, no green plant matter coming through. It's not as efficient. It takes a lot of energy, and you got to be careful with the heat as well. So you get into hydrocarbon solvent, efficient, maybe the most efficient, the least expensive of the three at a scalable level. But again, it doesn't come without its trade-offs as well. If you're not doing a thorough job on your finished goods and getting any sort of residual solvents out, that certainly could be a health issue. So here I have third-party lab results because this is what I want to share with people. We are a hexane extractor. We haven't shied away from that. I know, you know, people have said, well, hexane, that's a scary word, or it sounds bad, or any of these solvent extractors. And I agree, but we also have families too, and we do not want to be putting anything out on the market that could harm our families. So this was on the left, you'll see a winterized crude. You know, pretty good potency there, good miners as you look through that COA. And on the right, after extraction, this is after we fully degas the winterized crude. If you look at the results on the residual solvents, I mean, there's zero to little left in that material. Planning. So, you know, before you can start talking to an extractor, and I'm not trying to step on the agronomist or the genetics guy's toes, I just want to look at this holistically. So considerations for producers: soil sampling, genetic selection, and, you know, that's an entire slippery slope of autoflower versus the photo periods and how you're going to do those, finding, you know, the right propagator. Are you going to direct seed? The cultivation plan, are you going to, you know, hope for high canopy? Are you going to plant pretty densely populated? Do you have some sort of plan figured out with a mower where you can mow between rows? I saw a lot of different scenarios this year. Farmers they're very intelligent, right? They're as a kid coming from a farming background, my uncle and my grandpas, they always impressed me. I mean, a farmer is expected to engineer on the fly, that's for sure. So your harvest method as well, and the harvest method, everything is going to come back to, hey, how large am I going? I caution guys to avoid scale at this point, just due to the nature of this market. Don't be willing to bet any more than you want to lose. So with the harvest method, the mechanical, again, we saw people with silage choppers, combines, bean pickers. Guys were pretty original with their ideas. Just trying to cut labor costs and be as efficient as possible, especially with farming. You're dealing with weather windows. Manual's nice because you're not having that trichome loss, but, you know, manually harvesting, you know, tens of acres, that's no short task there. Drying, especially in the Midwest and the states with the more humid just weather patterns, such as the Southeast, definitely the I states, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana. This is something that I think has to have asterisks on your list. You need to definitely have a plan for if you're going to mechanically dry or just hang dry. You know, they each have their pros and cons. Mechanical dryers, you know, you're hauling a lot of water out of the field, but you know what, you're getting that to a stable, storable point. You know, natural drying, you don't have the cost of the drying. But, there's certainly the challenges there. That is a lot of manual labor. That's a lot of time. And then just consider where you're hanging as well, in a barn or shed. Saw a couple guys that did end up collapsing in their outbuildings just because they hadn't thought of those things. Storage, I've heard anything from it could lose 0.5% of CVD per month to it's 2% maybe a year. I think we're all learning together, but the thing we do know about storage is you want to avoid oxygen degradation. So I'm kind of borrowing some concepts that I've learned in other industries, but craft brewers, for example, they don't use a lot of hops in their beer, and the recipe is a pretty minimal amount, and they want to keep those hops fresh. So they nitrogen purge those bags. They try to keep the biomass or the hop from degrading as much as possible, and that has to do with oxygen contact. Transportation, are you hauling it to the processor? Do they have a freight company they work with? Do they own the assets? Is the insurance viable? Am I going to haul this myself like a regular farmer? And it all depends on location. If you're in Indiana, of course, it probably makes sense to haul yourself. But if you're in Oregon, it's a completely different story. And that's something, we have an entire packet designed to that. We just want to do everything above board, be good stewards, BOLs, COA, showing the THC is compliant, trailer seal, licenses from the grower, licensed by us. I just try to imagine where a truck's getting pulled over, at 10 at night in, say, Nebraska, and we want to do as much to be transparent with the trooper. And, of course, we're running a law-abiding business. During harvest, we definitely flex the hours as well. Ask, when you're getting ready to contract with an extractor, what do your receiving hours look like? Do you receive over the weekends? If it's March, is that going to be a different delivery window than, say, November? Genetics matter. So this is something that, I was told this by the geneticist, obviously, from day one, that this was a big piece. And you like to think you understand something until you really get to working in it. And people say, okay, I've got about an 8% CBD material. What can I expect in yield? It truly depends. The minors matter because that compromises part of the material. So if you're going to isolate and you have a lot of minors, you're not going to have as good a yield going to isolate. So just kind of some of these things to think about next level as we truly dive deeper into this. What is the market asking for as well? I've had so many people say, CBG is the next wave. And yes, maybe so. I can't confidently say that I know what CBG does. I'm excited about it as well. But trying to stay in tune with what the market wants and doing what you can deliver on as a grower, sometimes those are two different things. And then, long term, is CBD just the tip of the iceberg? Can we extract all cannabinoids this way? This is something we're, currently exploring. We do not know the answers to this, but if you think about getting cannabinoids to the masses, full spectrum, distillate, is going to vary so much batch by batch. So maybe the future of this is taking all cannabinoids to isolate and the formulation exactly every time. Choosing an extractor. I think the first question you need to ask your extractor is the facility certified GMP. So GMP, good manufacturing practices. So this is something that we feel very confident about. As a food company, we absolutely grasp this concept. We're ISO accredited, FDA approved facility. Does the facility have a food certification? Ours is BRC. There's multiple certifying bodies out there. We also offer some value adds such as kosher. We're working on halal as well, but just think about, okay, I've produced this beautiful biomass. I want to work with an extractor that's fully certified and will open as many doors in the finished goods arena as possible. Do they have a HACCP plan? What does their QA team look like? Do they understand lot traceability, recall impacts? What are the costs? Hey, what sorts of contracts are you offering? Could you please walk me through, what that would look like on, say, a 10,000 pound example, 10% CBD, 10% moisture. when people talk about efficiencies and extractors, one of the measurable items there is how much CVD are they leaving in their material. So earlier, we had talked about steam distillation and how it wasn't efficient. So meaning you got a 10% material in there and they could only get 6% of the CVD out just due to the technology and the equipment they have. So I know when we extract a lot, we test all the spent material post-extraction on what percent we're leaving in there. I'd say across the board with a hexane extractor, we're about 0.3%. But that's something to really ask guys. I've heard, ethanol CO2 in the range of 0.5 to 1%, but it just truly varies company by company, depending on what equipment you have. What does the lead time look like? That's something that's becoming more apparent to me now as well. So we're seeing guys in the spring, a lot of biomass out there, they're worried about it. So we're having a lot of guys trying to cram through their material at once. It's manufacturing. We treat things on a first come, first serve, and coming back full circle, and the commodities industry, relationships matter. The specifications on the biomass. So every company is different, but I think it's pretty clear across the board what extractors are looking for with the heavy metals and the pesticides, because if you do have those, they're going to concentrate when you extract, and it's going to be really tough to do anything in the oil form. Isolate still may be an option, but again, as I look at the spec sheet, we're testing for moisture, potency. Well, it all starts with potency, right? You got to make sure you're compliant with the THC side. It all starts there. And once that question is answered, then you're looking at moisture, CVD potency, heavy metals, pesticides, microbials. We try to be as thorough as possible on the front side, because whatever you bring in, we don't want to contaminate somebody else's material. We do a purge between lots, so that's to avoid any of those issues. But the oil, the quality of the oil is just truly going to depend on what sort of material was brought in on the front side. As a hexane facility, we can wet extract in theory, but we are not there yet. We're exploring some options to get there, but right now, as a facility, we need the biomass to be under 10% moisture content. We send these off to a third-party lab that we've been working with. It's usually about a 7-gram sample for each lot. But just keep in mind too, because I know we've gotten results back on potency specifically, and people expect the entire truckload to run like that. There will be some variation as well. They could run higher, they could run lower, but a 7-gram sample being a very clear guide on a 20,000-pound truck is, that's just a very, very small sample. You'd have to take hundreds to have a good idea of how it's going to extract.
Nate, thank you. The first question I have is, as a oil extractor, what's your biggest challenge dealing with your customers?
Setting expectations, right? So I think a lot of guys, first, I don't see it anymore in 2020, but 2019 was explaining everybody to the point system. Like, we're, an example, we're offering $1 per point. Well, what you saw there is you saw a lot of extractors buying material based off COAs, and we just talked about how COA is not going to be very accurate in how a truckload runs. So if you're purchasing in the spot market off a point, you probably were having a tough time paying the bills 6 months later, because how that oil extracted versus what that small sample said. Trying to share those same thoughts with producers and farmers, and being transparent and open, having them come to the plant saying, hey, here's exactly what we're measuring and testing for at this step in the production report.
The next question is, maybe share your experience on how material comes to you, how you like it, and how you reject it.
Okay. So we're able to accept a hand check material, a combine milled material, and a pelletized material. We need it less than 10% moisture. It has to pass the pesticides and heavy metal standards from the lab and the microbials. And then we want to work with guys, but at the same time too, we send out a shipping packet with loads that we ask that they complete, and it arrives in good order. And you know, this is a plant that's been demonized for so long. We're a food company. We want to be as transparent and above board as possible and cross every I, or cross every T and dot every I.
And tell us about some shipments you've rejected.
I would say most of the shipments revolve around high moisture. So this is specifically during harvest, guys antsy to get material into the plant. And I mean, some of the super sacks would be dripping wet. So we would try to, you know, work with guys, say, hey, this is too wet. You're going to have to, you know, unfortunately get this load, get it drier and bring it back to us. And we found that producers were, you know, we were transparent with them and we wanted to help them, but just due to the nature of our equipment and how our facility is set up, we were not able to accommodate very wet material.
Nate, you've given a number of tours. We've been out to your facility a number of times. For those that can't have a tour, can you refer them to any videos or YouTubes on your site so they can see what extraction actually looks like?
Absolutely. If you go to YouTube and you type in soil to oil, Biobin, that's also on the last slide as well. It's a YouTube call out, but the marketing team has done a nice little 1 minute, 30-second long video of both facilities. So we own two facilities, one in Michigan City, Indiana, one in Monticello, Illinois. Right now, the one in Michigan City, Indiana is the only one currently extracting hemp, but they are both licensed for hemp.
Great. And then lastly, are there any specific strains that you like processing over others?
So we've tried to keep track of this data to our best ability, but the problem becomes, okay, well, this 10,000 pound truck had 4 different strains, and due to our scalability, you know, that's just something that maybe we're not going to be as good at as somebody that processes 1,000 pounds a day can really be strain specific. I would say, you know, 2019, early part of 2020, it looks like cherry wine or some variety of cherry wine kind of dominates the genetics thus far. I would say 75–80% of the material we've seen has been cherry wine.
All right. Well, thanks. Why don't we get on with the second half? There's a number of questions I got, but you're going to answer that, I think, in the second half of your presentation. Thanks, Nate.
Absolutely. Okay, so moving on here, you know, what does the future look like for extractors? So 2019 wasn't very kind to some of the larger players. In 2020, you've seen some consolidations, you've seen some people exit the market, and it'll be interesting to see what transpires and what legal precedent set there. It's a very capital-intensive industry. If you have a green build or a brand new site that you have earmarked specifically for hemp, it's you know, if it's a $60 million facility in an illiquid market on the finished goods right now, it's certainly got to give a guy heartburn, guy or gal. Just talking about kind of where they were located, it seems like, and this is me reading hemp benchmarks, Pan Exchange, traveling, talking to other people. Tennessee, Kentucky, Colorado, and Oregon were home to some of the early movers and maybe some of the bigger players. But it seems like now more dominoes are falling. Both coasts are starting to come along. You know, I know there's a large extractor, a couple of them on the East Coast. I'm sure there's some in California. Coopetition, right? I think that Janie Campbell uses that word really well. You know, we're competing, but at this point too, with webinars like this, right, we're also cooperating, hoping to learn from each other. Throughput, efficiency, and certifications, I think, are kind of what's going to define the future as this matures with the processors. You know, keep in mind each state is unique with their hemp program and applicable rules, whether they're following USDA guidelines or using a pilot program. So before agreeing to any contractual terms with an extractor, do your homework on the state you're in and the state the extractor's in on the THC. What does the workflow look like of an extractor? You know, I've talked a couple times about craft beer distillation, and that's how I convey it the best. You know, everybody has different equipment. Everybody's going to have different techniques. So these workflows are not going to look the same for everybody. When I go to ours here, So on the left-hand side, we start with incoming biomass. So it's kind of broken down to two phases. You have extraction. Coming out of extraction, we have a paste that's fully decarboxylated. So we're coming off that extractor pretty warm there, converting any of those A compounds. And that's what I really call the extraction side. So past extraction, the downstream side, you would have refining. So you take that paste, let's say a paste is generally around a 50% CBD potency. You winterize, you have a 60% decarb and winterized crude. Then from crude, you can certainly sell as crude as well. People do not like to formulate finished goods with it just due to the earthy taste of it, some of the darker colors that aren't as appealing. When you go to the distillate, that gives you that nice honey amber color. Your concentration is going to go up on your CBD. And of course, as everybody knows, there's a step past that called isolate, where you're truly, you can do this with any cannabinoid. This is not specific to just CBD, right? You can isolate CBG, CBC, and these are things, again, this is the tip of the iceberg where we're trying to learn as fast as we can, but this is our process in a nutshell. The devil is in the details. So I'm going to show you a COA on the next slide. And people always want to know, okay, well, I walked through this example with you of 10,000 pounds, 10% CBD content, 10% moisture. You gave me what you think I could expect to yield on my crude. Now, how will that crude yield to distillate or isolate? Conservative yields I've heard in the market is, let's say, if you have a 55 to 60% crude, you're going to see about 70% of that volume yield to distillate, and you're going to see about 40% of that volume yield to isolate. And of course, those numbers could be better, but you try to manage expectations and you try to have a conservative starting mark. So on the left here, we have the biomass. As you look here, 6.594, pretty decent CBD content. This is a combined material. It did run really well through our system. The moisture was great, and it produced a 63% crude. And again, the one thing I want to bring up is the minors. So that's great, with the THC and the CBD, but the minors are going to impact your isolate yields. They're going to impact distillate yields. And we've had finished goods customers. Some people are concerned about the CBD content of a distillate, and some of them are looking for a total cannabinoids content. So beauty is in the eye of the beholder. There's certainly not a set standard yet, and I think that will kind of mature over the coming years. So let's talk about some of the common procurement contracts we've seen in the market from extractors. Spot agreement, extractor, pays X per pound. I think, people asking about the price per point. Again, I see that going the way of the dodo bird. I just don't see how any extractor could promise financial commitments on truckloads based upon a small sample. Just over time, it would be a recipe for disaster. Think of the traditional ag markets, corn farmer, wheat farmer, he's loading trucks out of his bin or right out of the combine, heading to the elevator, sold based on quality and volume. Toll agreement, that would be where the customer pays the extractor X per pound of biomass extracted, and then they get all the oil back. Of course, we can take that winterized crude to further specifications. So, we charge on the extraction side and then on the refining side as well. Split agreements, farmer and extractor agree to share the number of finished goods units produced. I know, for example, on our split agreements, we were kind of offering a 3-tier matrix in the market. So whether we run really crappy or really good material, our costs are going to be fixed as an extractor. So if it was less than 6% CBD, it was a 60-40 to Biobin. If it was 6 to 8% CBD, it was a 50-50, and anything over 8% was 40-60, 60 to the farmer. I've heard, splits all over the board. A lot of it's like anything else in business. A lot of it is going to be contingent upon quality and volume. To my knowledge right now, splits and tolls are the most common in the market. I don't know of anybody paying spot. Doesn't mean it's not happening. I mean, if you're a small craft extractor, I'm sure that's probably the way you're going. So walking through sort of a case study here, what would this look like if Biobin told with Midwest farmer 50,000 pounds? So chat with Mr. Farmer, go out, take a sample of his material. We send it off to a third-party lab. To give people an idea right now of what the toll market looks like as far as price per pound, I would say $6 to $9 per input pound is a pretty competitive price. That would be biomass to a fully winterized decarboxylated crude. So contract executed and signed. The samples collected, sent off to the third-party lab to make sure, again, we meet pesticides, heavy metals, microbials. You know, you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you. If you put, we understand the impact of a recall, so we are very thorough on the sampling process. Once sample clears specs, the shipping packet is emailed along with the trailer seal to the customer. Hey, Mr. Farmer Joe, here's our shipping packet. We've included a BOL. You know, I know this is something that farmers in the past, maybe they haven't done a BOL. I know for a fact you're not doing it for corn or wheat. But again, we're just trying to be transparent, above board, help any law enforcement officers along the way. Load is received at the plant, and 50% of the toll costs are due up front and 50% are due upon completion. We extract that to a winterized crude. So let's say a 10,000 pound truckload showed up today, I would expect to have that to a winterized crude in probably 2 to 3 days, just with our scalability. Then we share the amount of units produced, and if the customer would like to go to a further specification, we offer that as well. So sort of the saleable goods that we can offer from our location. Paste would be the pre-winterized. So we've had some customers ask for paste, like, hey, I like the waxes and the gums and the lipids in there. I think it's more holistic. I've heard people compare it to kind of whole wheat bread. Well, okay, I want a winterized crude. You know, I don't want any of those gums, waxes, lipids in there. And imagine it in a distillate form. Really, the difference in winterization is something that happens in oil production across the board. But if you had unwinterized distillate and winterized distillate, the unwinterized distillate would just look cloudy, foggy, hazy. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it from a consumption standpoint. It really has to do with the marketing and the appeal. So we offer a full spectrum oil. We do have some small throughput with the broad spectrum oil and isolate. I just want to caution everybody as well. You know, we've been through multiple vendors on the broad spectrum, people saying, hey, you know, we can do this for you. And I would say yet, and my caveat being scalable, but we have yet to find anybody in the country that's truly doing broad spectrum well. We're always looking for new partners there. So once we're finished, you know, we'll palletize, BOL, wherever the customer wants it shipped. You know, as long as the receiver has a hemp handling license, we're good to go. Some of our lessons learned from this is, you know, this sounds great on paper. It's you know, we try to be very cognizant of all the small details, but there's always something, right? There's always, well, hey, well, you know, plant calls out, this load's at 11%. Are we going to reject this load? And it's, okay, well, if we reject that load, how does that impact our production schedule? So a lot of this is the producer and the extractor working hand in hand, because the example I'll use is 2012 when corn was $8. If every corn farmer in America truly sold corn at $8, then the next year there wouldn't be anybody to sell their corn to, because they would have broke the ethanol plants, they would have broke the feeders. So people have to make money, I understand that, but if the margins become so skewed and unbalanced to one side, it affects the homeostasis of the ecosystem. Any further questions, comments, concerns?
So Nate, thank you very much. That was a very inclusive presentation. You talked, you know, about all aspects of the who, what, when, where, why of oil processing. We appreciate that. A question that came up is Delta-9 testing versus THC. So just I'll give a short answer and maybe you can embellish on that. is Delta 9 states. Illinois is a Delta 9 state. It allows you to use that test method, which often allows you to get much higher CBD levels than a total THC. The question I have for you, Nate, is if somebody is in Illinois and they're testing their crop based on Delta 9, and the THC levels can be beyond the regulations in Indiana, can you take that crop with a Delta 9 test and process it in an Indiana plant?
Now, to my knowledge, as the extractor located in Indiana, we would have to be compliant of the Indiana rules. So even though they were given the approval to harvest in Illinois, our Indiana rules would dictate a lot of those terms.
Nate, another question. If you go back to your slide where you showed your miners in the extraction process with the COA, yes. So in the, it shows milligrams per grams, but it shows the LOQ at ppm. Can you explain which miners are showing up in this COA that are above those?
Yeah, are you talking about the one on the left or the right there?
The one on the right.
So those miners, you're looking to see if everything from the acorn has been converted. You know, it looks like in this crude, there was a little bit left in the A form, you know, that 0.184. Looks like there's some CBDV values. I know that's been highly sought after lately, whether it be distillate, isolate form. CBC looks pretty high. So, you know, when customers call and ask for crude and they need a spec, the bottom of that crude COA, you know, showing the 63% CBD, the total cannabinoids is around 71%. So that's a pretty good crude right there.
Great. Another slide you had, I can't remember which one, but it talked about the ratios going from crude to distillate to isolate. But maybe you could start at the beginning, is if there's 100 pounds of biomass, how much crude oil does that produce?
It's so dependent upon a number of variables. I'd have to know, you know, what the sample COA said, what the moisture level was, because the first thing you have to do is take the moisture out of there. If it's 10% moisture, then from the start, you only have 90 pounds. So you can't assume that there's 100 pounds worth of CBD in there, because you got to account for the moisture first thing. You got to get it to a dry matter basis. Could
you give a range? What would the range be for 100 pounds? How much oil would you end up with?
Well, let's use the example of 10% moisture and 10% CBD just for easy numbers.
Yes.
So 100 pounds biomass. You account for the 10% moisture, that would be 90 pounds of biomass that you can theoretically get CBD from. It's called 10% material. So that leaves you, in theory, if you're 100% efficient, not accounting for what you couldn't get out of the spent material, that would be 9 pounds of CBD within that 100 pounds of biomass. So that's at the paste level. You still have to go through winterization and get all the gums and waxes out. So just, you know, being conservative, factoring in maybe 15 to 25% winterization loss, probably around 6.5 to 7 pounds of CBD per 100 pounds of biomass at 10% CBD content, 10% moisture.
Thanks, Nate. And then lastly, could you give us just an idea on price range for 100 pounds of biomass? What's it cost to run through your plant on a tolling agreement?
So 100 pounds, we would be at $6 a pound. So that would be $600. We would ask for the 300 up front and then 300 due upon completion. Our minimum lot size due to our scalability is 10,000 pounds. We fielded a lot of calls from people, hey, I've got 3,500 pounds of smokable or whatever they have. And I'd love to be able to accommodate, but we really try to shoot for that 10,000 pound mark. We do a disservice to our customers and the efficiencies if we're not getting at least a full truck.
And what is your capacity? I said earlier that you're one of the biggest processors. Help put that in context.
Yeah, so we're a density-based extractor. So currently today, we're right around 30 to 35,000 pounds per day. We've got some capital improvement plans, or we're looking at pelletizing and other options, and we think we can almost double that number. Then at the Monticello, Illinois facility, it's probably close to 70,000 pounds per day.
Well, Nate, thank you very much. The audience appreciated that. So thank you again for listening and joining us at today's session. I am Robert Colangelo. Be kind to each other out there and join us Wednesday at noon Central to make Hump Day Hemp Day.